Hey there, folks. Welcome to this week's edition of Storytime Live. I'm Dr. Jennifer Bird. I'm a biblical scholar, and I care very much about what people do with what they find in the Bible. I am so pleased to be able to say that this is the third scholar that I'm having on as a part of my story time to start having conversations instead of it just being me. And so I'm very pleased to introduce to you who's going to join me for this conversation. I want to say hello to everyone who's here live in the chat and just watching along while you do other things. I appreciate that. Let me just go ahead and bring her on. I have to say, I was deeply honored. You were one of the first people to respond right away. Say sure when I sent out this email about doing these conversations. So I appreciate your heart about that, your spirit about that, Adele. I appreciate that. Let me say a few things about this delightful human who has joined me for today. Adele Reinhartz is the distinguished university professor, or a distinguished university professor in the Department of Classics and Religious Studies at the University of Ottawa. There are many things in her curriculum vitae and in her experience I could reference, so I've chosen just a few. And that sounds something like this. Just for those of you who may not know, there's the society that is the organization, the professional organization for biblical scholars is called the Society of Biblical Literature, and the kind of the flagship journal for that society is called the Journal of Biblical Literature. And so Dr. Reinhartz was the primary editor of that for 5 years. She was also, I shared some of this last week, she was also the first female New Testament scholar who also identifies as Jewish. Just that New Testament and Jewish together is an interesting and powerful combo in our field. But she's the first to have those identifiers as a president of the Society of Biblical Literature. I went back through and counted. I may have missed a couple, but I think there are at least 140 presidents so far. Does that sound about right? 142 maybe? Yeah, and if I understood correctly, there've only been 11 females out of 142, right? So we've got a very interesting Venn diagram already. But then again, the New Testament and then New Testament as a Jewish scholar. So you were delightfully unique and interesting, and also going along with that, for those of you who are interested in seeing some of what Dr. Reinhartz has produced, much of her scholarship is very accessible, even though it is also pushing the field forward. So it is I try to talk about myself as a public scholar. Some of the stuff I write or publish isn't, it's not going to end up in a journal because it's not, I'm okay with that. I'm not publishing at university presses because that's not what I'm trying to do. And I love and need and respect those who are pushing the field, right, in those ways. So Adele has this really kind of a different voice that she's able to kind of do both at the same time. It's really, really unusual and delightful, in my opinion. Dr. Reinhardt has been a member of the Institutes of Advanced Studies in Princeton, as well as in Jerusalem, and has been a visiting professor at Harvard Divinity School, Yale Divinity School, and Boston College. If any of you know anything about those schools, just let that be what that is. It's an impressive lineup is what I'm getting at. She was inducted into the Royal Society of Canada in 2005, and I have all kinds of questions about that. I'll have to wait, perhaps. And into the Academy for Jewish Research in 2014. And I'm assuming that's a Canadian Academy of Jewish Research. No, it's not. It's American. Thank you. Okay. And so, in general, what you'll see if you go, I have in the description to this video, I do have her University of Ottawa professor description page linked in the description, as well as a link to her Amazon page that has, we go to the author page and it has all the books listed there. So if any of you want to check those out while we're talking, you can see those. But you'll see that they fall into generally speaking, two general categories. One being Bible or Jesus and film, in and of film, and then the dynamic that I keep trying to talk about whenever it's relevant, which is this element of the anti-Judaic themes within the Newer Testament writings, and therefore why there is that dynamic early church and, throughout the centuries. So this is an obviously given her identity, but, actually, it's not obvious given her identity now that I think about some of the conversations I've had with other Jewish scholars. So, really important stuff, really important work. And I was telling Adele ahead of time as we were gathering that what's going on here? Oh, something's happening. Okay. And my first exposure to her was with one, obviously one of her earlier works, Why Ask My Name? Anonymity and Identity in Biblical Narrative. And what I love about this, the thing that I took from it briefly was or before, this instead of the critique of anonymity, to see it as a way that opens up to a larger a way for people to access, right? Um, it like a more generic or the anonymity makes it more generic that more people can connect with, something like that. Instead of it being a critique, like, "Why aren't you naming these women?" Right? Is that briefly did I catch part of that?
Yeah. I mean, that's I was so happy that you mentioned that book.
Oh, good.
Even though the second book that I published, I think it came out around 1998 or like a really long time ago.
Yes, it was 98. Mhm.
But I would say it's one of the books that I had the most fun with, in part because I entered into the project with one set of ideas, and as I started working on it, I had to completely revise my thinking about the topic of anonymity. And so that's what you've picked up on. I started as a kind of a feminist project,
Right.
expecting that most of the anonymous characters that I would find, this is in the Hebrew
In the
Bible.
Bible, right, not necessarily the New Testament. Mhm.
Yeah, it's not a New Testament
The
book.
big narratives of the Hebrew
Yeah,
Bible.
the narrative arc really
Yeah.
from beginning of Genesis into the end of Second Chronicles.
Yes, yes.
Effectively, I would find that most of the anonymous characters were women, and that the anonymity would serve to kind of suppress their roles.
Right.
And that's really not what I found. I
Right.
found that actually there are more anonymous male characters than female characters. It was interesting,
Yeah.
but that anonymity, um, when a character was anonymous and had a role in the narrative, that anonymity did not suppress that character. Instead, it drew attention to the role that they played. And so to me, that was really
It
interesting.
is absolutely, in a sense, groundbreaking for a feminist to be pointing this out, right? Yeah.
Right. I mean, it
Being
doesn't take away from the fact that one could really engage in feminist analysis of all
exactly.
of these stories, whether they featured men or
Exactly.
women.
Right.
It's just that it challenged the assumptions that I went into it with. And
And
so that was fun.
and you were open to learning and changing, and how beautiful is that?
Yes, if not, like, what are we doing?
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Um, I do wanna before I kind of redirect this to asking you more questions about yourself and your background and really why you do this work, I did wanna point out to folks that I don't have all of, Dr. Reinhardt's books, but I do have 2 that were really important to me and continue to be important to me. I do work around this issue of anti-Judaic content in the Newer Testament, and it shows up primarily, significantly in Hebrews and the Book of Acts, but also the Gospel of John, which has been a focus for Adele for a long time. What the introduction to this book, which is titled "Violence in the New Testament," so it's edited by 2 colleagues of ours, Shelley Matthews and Lee Gibson, but you were a contributor, and then at the introduction to this book, there are 2 quotes. One of Renee Girard, "Violence is the heart and secret soul of the sacred." And I'm pausing on purpose because I'm a little bit, I start to get really emotional about these things. So just bear with me. Because it is so real to me, I guess. Anyway, it's not my reality, but it's my reality because I remember thinking about these things through very fundamentalist Christian eyes. And then the second quote is a quote of you, and I'm not sure they included what source. Maybe it was at a conference that you said it. The contradiction between the commandment to love and the incitement to hate not only belongs to later interpretations of the fourth gospel, meaning the Gospel of John, but is also inherent in the text itself. And there are many things about this dynamic that we could talk about, but I'd rather focus for now on talking about some of the work and then asking you about yourself, and we'll see what we get into later. And then, of course, this piece that is really quite important to me, I think, is very important contribution that you two edited, that you and Paula Fredrickson, edited, Jesus, Judaism, and Christian Anti-Judaism, Reading the New Testament After the Holocaust. So none of this is light reading, but it is all relatively accessible. And these are all written by scholars in the field. But I think the topic, in these chapters, the topic in these books, and the books are important and are addressing some of the basic building blocks of the issue, it seems to me. So those are the ones of hers that I'm familiar with. Let me briefly share with you her two most recent books, Cast Out of the Covenant, Jews and Anti-Judaism in the Gospel of John. And to be honest, I wasn't aware of the expulsion theory, which I just have to shake my head sometimes. I'm like, what is it people are thinking when they want to make it all nicey nice? So I'm highlighting this for you all. I didn't share that. I just realized I didn't share that. My apologies. Let me try that again. So the most recent book of hers is Bible and Cinema in a Routledge series, which I'm a big fan of Routledge publisher for the most part, at least. Bible and Cinema, an introduction. So that would be the two main areas of her interest. And let me pull up the other one really quickly, since I'd forgotten wasn't sharing. Oh dear. Let's do it this way. Here we go. Cast Out of the Covenant, and then that, and then I go back. Okay. I often just talk myself through it so people know that I'm working on it. Cast Out of the Covenant, right? So this is so the two most recent books in the kind of two general categories that she contributes to, Jews and Anti-Judaism in the Gospel of John. So those are the recent pieces from you, works from you. So you are, I think of you, someone, I was going to say an elder in the field. I don't mean that to sound respected person who's been in the field for many years. I don't even know how long. 35, 40 years?
Well, let's see. I got my PhD in 1983.
Okay.
And I started teaching before then, actually. I'm in my 43rd year of.
Okay. Yeah, of doing this. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that work, right?
But only 41 years or 40 years past PhDs.
Okay. Right. Okay. So I'm curious, I would love to know any part of your story that you'd feel like sharing with me and with the folks who are here, in terms of why is it that you got into this work? Why was this an important field for you to get into?
Well, I should maybe say that I kind of fell into it in some fashion. I didn't. The fact that I ended up here was not part of a well thought out plan.
Gotcha. Yeah, I can relate.
After a certain point, yes, I was
sure. Yeah, when you're in PhD work, it's kind of coming together.
It feels more haphazard than that.
Okay.
I have a BA, honors BA in Jewish Studies from the University of Toronto. Okay. And when I finished that, which was in 1975, I didn't know what I wanted to do. There were all kinds of options, but nothing really grabbed me. I was good at writing essays, and I had taken a few years of Hebrew, so I thought, I'll just continue. I was very interested in early Judaism, early rabbinics and things like that. So I thought, okay, I'll just apply for an MA, and that'll buy me some time. until I figure out what I want to do.
Mhm.
So I applied to a bunch of schools, and I got into all those schools. But I ended up going to McMaster University, which was about an hour. McMaster's in Hamilton, Ontario, about an hour west of Toronto, where I had grown up.
Okay.
And I liked their program, and they offered me a very nice scholarship. So
Nice.
I went there
Mhm.
with the intention of doing an MA in Jewish Studies and then kind of just figuring
Being
it out.
done. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I went to talk to a few people in the spring of 75 before I accepted the offer. And one of the people I met with was Ed Sanders. So Ed
Oh,
Sanders
yeah.
was, he taught at McMaster for many years.
And will you say just a little something about him for people who
Oh,
don't know
yeah,
who he is?
Sanders, one of
Yeah.
absolutely great New Testament scholars of the 20th century, his work is still very influential today.
Mhm.
He
Mhm.
died just over a year ago, and actually at the SBL meeting in San Antonio in November, we had a memorial
Nice.
session and appreciation of his contribution. He wrote
Nice.
books on Paul, on Second Temple Judaism, on Jesus, that really have had a profound impact on the field.
Yes.
But I didn't know who he was at that.
Right, that often happens, right?
He hadn't yet actually made his name at that point.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was 75,
I
so it was
went
early.
to see him, and I went to see Al Baumgarten, another really eminent scholar, just to meet them and get a sense of the program. And I learned from them that the program was somewhat unique in the sense, this was in the religious studies department, that people who were specializing in early Christianity or in New Testament were required to take courses in Jewish studies and the other way around. So if I was coming to work on early Judaism, I would need also to take a course in New Testament. So I thought that was okay. I hadn't read the New Testament, but I thought it should be something,
I
that
love it.
have
There's
passing.
gotta be something. I mean, the guy was Jewish, right?
Yeah, I never even thought it through that to that extent. I thought, okay,
Gotcha. Okay, yeah.
first century. I knew enough to know that it was probably like from the first century. So
Gotcha. Okay.
fine. And at some point, and I don't think it was from Ed,
I'm sorry, I'm cracking up with this.
at some point, I found out that when we would do New Testament at the graduate level, it would be in Greek.
Greek, right.
How am I going to do that?
Never studied Greek, yeah.
Study Greek. It never occurred to me to study Greek. My
Right.
Hebrew was excellent already.
I'm sure. Yeah, yeah.
Not my biblical Hebrew, it was modern Hebrew that I
Oh, right, right.
So I found a 6-week crash course in classical Greek at York University, which is one of the other universities in Toronto. And I did that and walked into Ed Sanders' seminar on Galatians at the beginning of September of 1975.
Oh, goodness.
It still remains one of the most nerve-wracking academic experiences I've ever had.
Was it really? Yeah.
Go around the table and read and translate. And here I had my 6 weeks of classical.
On the spot. Oh my gosh. Galatians is a bit complicated.
Course.
Right. Wow.
And the other thing is, this was taking place at exactly the same time that Ed was submitting his manuscript, Paul and Palestinian Judaism.
Okay.
So he was up.
Because he was at his prime with Paul.
He was at his prime, and he was, very still kind of in the orbit of that.
Yes.
Book.
Right.
And so it proved to be both extraordinarily nerve-wracking, but also very exciting. He was a very dynamic teacher as well.
Lovely.
So, but I continued in Jewish studies, and I did my MA in Jewish studies. And then by that point, I was enjoying the academic life, and I thought, and I still didn't have any bright ideas about what else I would do. So I went on for a PhD in early Judaism. At a certain point, part of, I should backtrack and say that part of what persuaded me to go to McMaster was also that Ed told me that if I came, they would support me for a year of study at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And this was something I very much wanted to do.
Yeah, sure.
And so I actually did that. I finished my MA, and I did my doctoral coursework, my comprehensive exams, and then I went to Israel.
Oh, wow.
And in the course of my time in Israel, I decided that I would switch to New Testament.
Hmm.
And this was not a decision that was well received by my would-be supervisor at
Right? Yes.
Sanders.
Right?
Um, but
What made you why?
well,
What happened that
yeah, there were a couple of reasons.
yeah.
First of all, I realized what it meant to really do Jewish studies at a very high level.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
I did not
Mhm.
feel that I had the background to do that.
Ah, okay.
So it was just a
That's
practical
honest. Yeah.
factor. Yeah, it was
Mhm.
just a practical factor. I mean, I had a lot of background, and I've maintained, my interest and my activity in Jewish studies, but I didn't feel that I was at the right place to actually continue with that. And
Okay.
I wanted to stay where I was. But the other factor, and I think this was really the more important factor, was that it occurred to me at a certain point that it could be a very powerful thing to be a Jewish scholar of the New Testament. I didn't know any others at the time.
Mhm.
There
Mhm.
are others, and there were at that time also. I just didn't know who they were, and I
Sure.
had never met any of them.
Mhm.
But I felt that because I had a strong background in Jewish studies and that I myself was Jewish,
Mhm.
that becoming a professor of New Testament would give me a platform for reaching a lot of students, most of whom would be Christian.
Mhm.
And so I decided that that's actually what I wanted to do. By then my Greek wasn't too bad,
Okay. Okay.
and I felt that also. I mean, the fact that I would be working with Ed Sanders was also a factor
Hmm.
because he had already by then not just developed his reputation, but also shown himself to be someone that I would want to work with and that
Hmm.
was valuable.
Mhm.
And so that's what I did. So that's how I got into it. Was that the question?
Yeah, sure. Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Whatever you feel like saying about that, but yeah.
So that's how I began.
Yeah.
And I would say, I was reflecting on this week as well, that, at the time that I was in graduate school, sort of in the 70s up until the early 80s,
Mhm.
we're very much still thinking of ourselves as doing objective research, objective
Right.
scholarship.
Right.
And
Right.
what meant was that who we were as individuals and what we cared about was not supposed to be part
Mm-mm.
of what we investigated as
Right.
scholars.
Right. It's supposed to be
Even
objective.
our own tradition, all
Mhm.
of that was meant to be bracketed. And I
Right.
I really bought into that.
Did you? Yeah, you tried to honor the code.
I really did. And so for the first, couple of decades of my career, I actually didn't address the questions that later became central to my scholarship, which is questions of Judaism, anti-Judaism, when it came to
Mhm. Mhm.
the text that became part of the New Testament and the history of interpretation of the New Testament as well.
Mhm.
So I really wasn't engaged with those questions, even though what had motivated me in part was the
Mhm.
idea of being a Jewish,
Presence. Yeah.
teacher,
Yeah.
a Jewish presence in a classroom devoted to the study of the New Testament.
Yeah.
Part of what motivated me. But I didn't really, address the issues in the New Testament that would be central to that
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah.
for quite a long time. Then, of course, as the field changed and different sort of intellectual currents
Mhm.
started affecting how we did um, our work in biblical
Mhm.
studies.
Mhm. Acknowledging up front our identities and
Acknowledging up front and making it
yeah.
easier then to consider that. It's not just a
Right.
matter of what you say to other people, it's also a matter of what you say to yourself about what your role as a scholar is. So it became easier for me also as someone who had always tended to bracket off my identity, from my scholarship, to
Mhm.
say, well, actually, I can do this. It can be okay to do it and still do responsible
Respon
scholarship.
Mhm. That's the key, right? The fear that it wouldn't be responsible
The
simply
fear
because
that it wouldn't be responsible and that others might not see it as responsible as well.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
But things have changed, and I would say it's well over 20 years now that I'm being much more, that I've been focusing on these issues that are actually quite central.
Mhm.
Uh,
So your dissertation then wasn't on specifically on John, the Gospel of John?
Yes, my
Oh, it
dissertation.
was? It
Yeah, it's
was? Okay.
working on the same text for more than 40 years. Can you
I mean, bless you, because
That's
I don't like that gospel.
you know, how did that happen? It's not
Yeah.
even long a text, like what else? What is there to say for so many years? No, my dissertation, which I never published, was on the signs narratives. This is the work that we were doing on the Gospel of John,
Right, yeah.
source criticism, redaction criticism, and then just beginning with literary criticism, which Ed Sanders did not approve of at that time. It was
Oh,
a new thing and seemed to be quite threatening to the field. I was quite taken with it.
you were early in that, it
I
kinda
was
seeing the
already-
value that it brought for the work
Yeah,
you're trying to do.
right. And
Interesting.
I still see it as tremendously important. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah,
So, I think I was asked to moderate one of the panels. This book came out of an early
oh,
panel
yes, right.
session, right? And I think I was
Right.
moderated the one after that.
Yeah.
Um, I'm wondering if you could say something about how those 2 panels that I don't remember the specific name of the committee or the session, but addressing violence in early Christianity in the New Testament or something like that. Um, how did that how did you find others to do that? Like, I keep thinking about what is it that made you want to do this particular conversation? Why was that the conversation that you wanted to do?
Um, well, the violence conversation itself, I wasn't really a major participant.
Oh, okay. My
For all
apologies.
these.
Okay.
I think it was, if I remember, this was a very long time ago. I
It
think it was
was. It was
Shelley
chill.
who
Mhm.
approached me and asked me to do something.
Gotcha. Okay.
But that was one of the early things that I did, and really being very explicit about what I saw as the anti-Jewish elements in the Gospel of John. So that was an important article for me because it allowed me to work through certain aspects of the Gospel in a way that continues right now, to inform my research as well. And part of what I was interested in was, in a way, thinking about the fact that a certain text will hit us differently depending on who we are.
Mhm.
And so I, as a Jew, a highly identified Jew,
Mhm.
um, was always struck by the awful things that the Gospel of John says about Jews,
Yes, right?
especially John 8:44,
8. Yeah.
which refers to Jews as
Children.
having the devil as their father, and the
Yes.
whole impact of that imagery to this
Mhm.
present day in terms of anti-Semitic imagery. So I
Yes.
was always struck by that. And at the same time, always encountering people for whom the Gospel of John was the gospel of love.
Their favorite, yes, the Gospel of Love, their favorite.
Right.
Yeah.
Uh, so I
It's
wanted to
stunning, isn't it?
explore that, and really to draw attention to the underbelly of John's rhetoric, that even the language around love is actually a bit problematic if you think about it as part of an overall rhetorical program. And that's what I finally explored pretty, in a lot of detail in my book, Cast Out of the Covenant,
Okay.
that you just mentioned.
Okay. Right. That particular theory that people present is, oh, sorry. I was looking at it earlier that
Well,
this
there
is
is that theory, right? So what you mentioned earlier, the expulsion theory, which some
yes.
people might not
Right.
be aware of. But this is a theory that is still very much accepted in Johannine studies, although it has been questioned not just by me, but by others. The theory that the Gospel of John encodes within its narrative the story of a community of Jewish Christ believers who were expelled from the Jewish community because of their faith in Jesus.
Right.
There are lots of reasons why that's a problematic.
Yes, there are.
But that's what the term expulsion theory.
Right. Yeah. And so, right, you're addressing why all of that really doesn't make sense in terms of the way, the problematic nature. Yeah.
I've been addressing that. The first article I wrote on, which was really a straight on critique of that argument, came out in 1998. And I've been away at this for
25 years.
Seriously. Yeah. So,
and part of me is like, I'm not surprised they're not taking you seriously, but it still breaks my heart that that's not being centralized, right? That your arguments around that are not being taken more seriously.
Well, some people do take them seriously.
I'm sure. Yes.
It's just that I think that within Johannine studies, that means the community of scholars who really basically obsess about the Gospel of John, many of them are caught in a kind of a conflict, which I talk about in my book. On the one hand, the Gospel of John is sacred, part of the sacred scriptures for Christian communities. On the other hand, it says some hateful things that many Christians don't want to be associated with, such as anti-Judaism. Right. And so it's difficult, I think, for many people to hold both of those things in tension.
It is.
The idea of a sacred text that at the same time poses certain ethical dilemmas or seems to propose unethical positions that we would now consider unethical. And so I think there's a resistance to critiquing John or to viewing John as anti-Jewish. And there are many ways that scholars try to get around this, most of which sound quite apologetic to me. But I think it's because of this kind of trying to reconcile these different elements of the gospel, what it means for them as Christians. Whereas for me, I'm not Christian.
Yeah. So you can call it out.
I'm aware of that because of the people that I know and the books that I read.
Yeah.
But it's not, the Gospel of John is not part of the canon that is sacred
that you honor, right? Yeah. I wanted to share John 8 with people, just in case, partly it's just helpful, and then let's see. I think we're still in this. Let me see where we're going. Okay, let me see. I've never figured out how to get rid of this right-hand side when I zoom in like this. There probably is a way. I just don't know what it is. I just found it.
There you go.
And this whole chapter actually is
problematic.
Yeah, it's challenging, and I used
42 and following.
Thank you. I used to try to read it out loud with students just so they could see how convoluted and not direct, and they're just missing each other all over the place, and the language and rhetoric is. So let's see. I'm going to come back over here, see what we're looking at. I'm just going to go ahead and read it.
Read it from 42. I don't think you have to, or even 43.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, we're not illegitimate. Yeah, you're right. There's so many pieces that are confusing. You have to understand what they're talking about when they say we're not illegitimate children. We have one Father, God himself. In verse 41, Jesus said to them, if God were your father, you would love me, for I came from God and now I am here. I did not come on my own, but he sent me. Why do you not understand what I say? It's because you cannot accept my word. You are from your father, the devil, and you choose to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks according to his own nature. For he's a liar and the father of lies. Liar, liar, bad liar. But because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. Which of you convicts me of sin? If I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? Whoever is from God hears the words of God. The reason you do not hear them is that you are not from God.
Okay.
And
There
then
you go.
this thing about the demon and all this stuff. But yeah, troubling.
That's the, and, you know, and especially this phrase, but, you know, you have the devil as your father.
Right, right.
Um,
Dude, took very, very, it unfortunately became very fertile ground for early,
yeah,
the early church fathers, and how they,
that's right.
I mean, and, you know, I don't know how much people here watching know this, but they're, you know, people to this day still reference, the, is it Tertullian's, Paschal, sermon, you
Yeah.
know, calling Jews, you know, murderers of God, like to
Well,
this day.
I mean, the deicide charge, that's a, you know, that's in the chapter, in chapter 8, but it's also there in Matthew, and it's kind of a cornerstone.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no critical thinking here about what was going on for the writers and elements of that, but problematically that people continue to this day to reference these, the just horrific language about, right?
So, you know, part of, you know, what some people will say is that, well, it's not that John is anti-Jewish, it's that he's been interpreted, or, you know,
Mm,
misinterpreted,
mm,
through all the centuries. And I think, you know, it's absolutely true that the history of interpretation from the church fathers into the, you know, late antiquity, Middle Ages, Luther, you know, into the modern period has certainly, you know, grabbed onto some of these passages in the service of anti-Jewish,
right,
and in the modern period, you know, anti-Semitic
right.
types of attitudes and behaviors. But
Yeah,
what people have found troubling about some of my work is that I claim, and I would defend this claim, that the Gospel of John is itself anti-Jewish.
mm,
Not that the Gospel of John or the writer of the Gospel of John foresaw or
right,
intended all of the consequences of how his words would be used. No, I don't think so. But I think that there is a kind of intentionality that we can read in the text to distance the good guys from the Jews, the
yep,
good guys being Jesus and those who believe in Jesus,
mhm.
even though they themselves were Jewish. So
Jewish,
it has to
yes,
do with that label, the
yes,
label being Jewish.
yeah,
So they you know, people have pointed out to me, well, Jesus was Jewish and the disciples were Jewish, and you know, maybe the author of the Gospel of John was Jewish.
right,
So the gospel can't be anti-Jewish. I said,
right,
well, yes, it's true that those characters and maybe even the author, I have no idea,
right,
uh,
right,
you know, are Jewish. But the fact is that the label Jew
yeah,
is reserved primarily
yeah,
for those who are the enemies.
yes.
And to me,
Time and again. It's not just a thing you're misreading it here, Adele. It's like time and again. This is happening over and over again.
that's right.
It is not it's not something you miss if you're paying attention.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, and this becomes part of the tricky thing when I try to teach the gospels in intro courses or whatever, right? I'm trying to say simultaneously, I think that all of the content of the Newer Testament comes from people writing or identifying with a Jewish perspective. At the same time, they're also arguing, I think they're arguing with other members of the Jewish community and trying to create this division and say, we're the correct trajectory, you've got it wrong. And I do think that, and you know, maybe I'm off on some of that, and I'd be open to hearing if you have suggestions about that. But I think the literature's complicated.
Yeah. I think, you know, what helps me to think about it is to think about, you know, what's happening historically, not
Mhm.
about whether Christians were being expelled from here and there,
Right, right.
but that here we have these texts that became sacred for Christianity, you know, several centuries
Later,
that they
right?
were written. Um, what we came to call Christianity was still a Jewish thing at this
Sect,
point.
right? A group, right?
True,
Segment.
even for Gentiles or pagans or polytheists who became part of the movement. It was,
Right.
the parameters and the terms of reference were Jewish.
Yes.
Trying to
Yes.
figure out what they were and how they relate to Jews who didn't agree with them. And
Exactly.
so it's in that sense that I can have a bit of sympathy for, whoever wrote John, that he's trying to figure some things out. He's trying to argue for a certain position.
Right.
And he uses language, and he wants to argue that his group should not be identified as Judaioi. They're not yet Christians,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
they're not Judaioi.
They don't want to be. Okay. You're seeing the start of that kind of.
You see that somebody is already able to imagine a group of believers in Christ
Beside Jesus.
that did not identify as Judaioi.
Okay.
He
That
already imagine it. That
Okay.
doesn't mean that a split had already happened, but
Right.
he was able to imagine it.
Gotcha. That's actually helpful for me. I mean, I think in general, try to do general strokes to get people to just to even consider that they're potentially. I mean, that most of the writers are kind of locating themselves under the umbrella of Judaism in a general sense, in a segment that's still well. So yeah, so your point is helpful for me. I hadn't thought about.
Right. I mean, I've paid a lot of attention to labels.
Yes.
And so when I'm talking about John's anti-Judaism, I'm talking about how he uses the label Judaios or Judaioi, the Greek, to refer to the enemies of Jesus, those who want to kill Jesus, those who, plot for his death and all those things.
Yes.
At the same time, he presents a Jesus who's very, he observes the Sabbath, he goes up to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage festivals.
Yeah.
So there is a kind of what I called in my book an expropriation of Jewish ideas and symbols. These are now mine. The temple is my Father's house, Jesus said. Too. It doesn't belong to you folks that are doing these sacrificial things. It's my Father's house, and I'm telling you to get out.
Yeah.
Right? And so the scriptures are appropriated or expropriated, so that Jews, it says this in John chapter 5, Jews who don't understand that the scriptures point forward to Christ, they are condemned by Moses or condemned by the scriptures themselves. So there's a taking over of Jewish ideas and of Jewish covenantal symbols, at the same time as there's also a distancing from the label Judaios.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
That's what I see anyway.
Yes. Thank you. Right. It's so hard to get people to even consider this kind of both and, right? And to consider that for whatever reasons that we might not agree with, right? There is a struggle going on there that is what's embodied in that gospel. I would suggest, right? The fact that it's being written, there is some sort of internal thing going on, dynamics going on here, right?
It's hard. It's very hard to know.
Okay. Yeah.
What's going on externally?
That's fair. Yeah.
It's very hard to know, and I've really, question this assumption that we can read the Gospel of John or any of the Gospels as a kind of a window to what was going on at the time.
Okay.
We really don't know. But what we do know is that whoever wrote this is experiencing some sort of conflict and trying to figure something out, trying to figure out, where he stands, what he wants other people to do, whether they're going to do that or not. I think that's what is being expressed in the Gospel. And how it relates to what was going on elsewhere at the time is very difficult to say.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
We don't know whether that reflects at all a kind of external situation.
Yeah. Is it real or imagined on some level? Is there a kernel of reality, or is this an imagined imagine that I'm being persecuted, that kind of, all of which are things that are still happening to this day that we can see. We can look around ourselves and see, oh, I can see how someone would make those kinds of claims so strongly, even when it doesn't reflect reality.
That's right. And I think that's a good way of thinking about it. If we look around at political discourse in our own time,
Mhm.
and sometimes measuring that against what we understand to be actual, history and reality, we
Right.
can see that the narratives don't always match up. They often don't match up.
Right.
And that the narratives told by politicians, let's say, are told for specific reasons, for ideological
That's
reasons. And so
right.
why should our ancient authors have been different? They were also telling stories
Right.
for specific reasons as
Exactly.
well. And we don't know to what extent they even expected. I mean, they were telling stories of Jesus. That's the thing. So
Yeah.
what the Gospel of John wants you to think is that this is really what happened. This
Yep.
is really what Jesus said and did.
Yes, and look at the trajectory of that collection, right? This, what I like to call the Newer Testament, right? And the damage it has done, right? It I think, right, that it lit a fire for animosity towards certain people,
Well,
and
I
we can
think it did, but at the same
yeah,
time, many people who over the centuries have found comfort and
I
if you
know.
can't, I don't want to,
You don't want
um,
throw the baby out with the bathwater? It's
well,
more than a baby, though. It's bigger than
it's it's not my baby, so I
it's not your baby, that's
but
but
if
it
it's your baby, if it's
but
somebody
it was
else's
mine at
baby,
one point.
I don't want that thrown out.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, we need to care for that as well. And so, I think, yes, I think the New Testament and the way that it has been read has done a lot of damage as far as Jewish-Christian relations are concerned, and some of that certainly has been repaired since
Mm,
Vatican II, and since
mm,
kind of a rethinking of things on the part of other
mm,
of Protestant denominations as well. But here's the thing: I think that
mm,
part of the problem comes from the fact that people expect or people read the Gospels, let's say the Gospels in Paul, ahistorically,
mhm,
in the sense that it is scripture, and so somehow it's every bit of it is eternally
mhm, mhm.
um, valid
Universally applicable or
and applicable.
mhm,
That's the attitude that has allowed for
mhm,
um, some of the damaging effects of the text.
mhm,
If we had a different attitude that said, okay, there's a lot here that's valuable,
mhm,
but let's not forget that these texts are a product of their own time and place, and that the attitudes that are expressed there and the ideas that are expressed there are also a function of that time and place, which is not the time and place that we're in right now.
mhm, mhm,
Uh, so I think a historical perspective like that could have,
mhm,
you know,
mhm.
can undo some of that damage. But so it's not just the New Testament itself, but the
Right.
tendency to read it ahistorically
Mhm, mhm,
uh, that I think
mhm.
causes some of the issues.
Right. I think I was having a moment there in that the connection to current political rhetoric that
Yeah,
is coming from, in particular, people in our country, and that has led to a lot of like, harmful actions and legislation,
yes, yeah,
right, so, so there's a relatively immediate, effect between what this person is saying and how people act based on taking
right.
him at face value. So there's so I was kinda making this, kinda connection that so many of my students, at least in the past, and it was news to me when I got to seminary, the history of antagonism, right,
Yeah,
towards Jews from a Christian perspective, from the church, and it's not just, it's not just the pogroms, it's not I don't wanna even say just Holocaust, right, but there's a thread that connects from
there's a
1st
thread.
century to the 20th, and so that was relatively new to me to even consider in seminary, and was one of the best courses for me because of that, right? Um, so I think I was trying to make that parallel, for people
And
that
you know, what happens in current political discourse is the invocation of the Bible in
mm,
support of certain positions,
right,
as if it's straightforward. Well, the Bible says.
right, yes. Cherry picking a line out of context that has nothing to do with what you're how you're using it. Yeah, yeah. I'm looking at the time, and I think that and I didn't ask you ahead of time, so I hope do you have another 10 minutes? Can we do,
Sure, yeah.
can we do maybe a Q&A? I wanted to share so let me do this briefly since I did ask for it, and I've asked people who come to join me for this conversation what readings were really helpful for them early on. And my thinking is for those who are watching, now or later, I'm just interested in trying to help you all expand your horizons if you're interested in these conversations so that, when I find someone I'm really inspired by and learn what they've been reading, that kind of is interesting to me. So I thought, let me go ahead. I haven't put the links in the description yet, but I will do that. I realized I pulled them up, but I didn't add them. So let me share those briefly with you all. I have to say, Adele, this woman, Rosemary Radford Ruther, I'm just a big fan. She was a powerhouse. I don't even know how many books this woman wrote, but it just seemed to me everything she wrote was really important and very densely researched and just so this is going to be a heavy one, but
Yeah.
I'm
So
curious, when did you encounter this? Yeah.
I encountered this shortly after it was published. I
Okay.
think
Okay.
probably around
Is that
was it
late 70s?
1975,
Yeah, I
74.
was thinking it was 70s. Okay.
I know that because the college, I went to the University of Toronto, and at University of Toronto, everybody belongs to a college in addition to a college that's part of the
Right.
university. And so because I got a certain high average in my grades, I
Mhm.
got a prize. And
Oh, gotcha.
I chose this book.
Wow.
It's before I had any idea that I was going to be, I just thought it would be interesting.
Right.
And the point that I took away from it was the point about anti-Judaism being kind of hardwired into Christology. So I was interested in that. And even though I didn't come to work on these issues for at least another 20 years after this
Right.
point,
Yeah.
it always stuck with me
Mm.
as something that was insightful on her part and
Mhm.
also very much argued against by others.
Mhm.
Really rubbed people the wrong way. So I thought that there was probably something to
To it.
it.
I like that reasoning. There's probably she's making too many people mad. There's
People
she's
mad.
turning over something really important
Right.
here.
That's right.
That is true of nearly everything she wrote, it seems to
Yeah,
me.
yeah, she was
Yeah.
really an amazing.
And there are so many Catholic women that have done that, in biblical studies and theological studies, it seems to
Yeah,
me.
yeah, very
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, we can do these other 2 I'm really curious since you're willing to talk about it, what you're gonna say about the, I'm sorry, that was the same one. Okay, hang on. So, anatomy of the Fourth Gospel.
Yeah, so there's Alan Culpepper who has, uh, whom I hadn't met yet at the time that I encountered this book. This book came out in 1983. But he has since become a good friend and colleague,
Oh,
very
lovely.
important scholars on the Gospel of John.
Mhm, mhm.
He was the first, you see the subtitle, Anatomy of the Fourth Gospel, a study in literary design. And so that's what attracted me to the book, is that he really very clearly and convincingly showed how different elements of literary criticism as it was practiced, in the early 80s could be so helpful in generating insights into the Gospel of John. And this is true of other texts as well. But I already mentioned that I was very drawn to the literary
Mhm,
approaches to the New Testament.
mhm.
And for me, this book was really central. I still come back to it.
Do you? Yeah.
He was really the first to explore in detail how one could really benefit exegetically
Hmm.
from paying attention to the literary design, the literary structure, plot,
Uh-huh,
character,
uh-huh, uh-huh.
uh, symbolism, all of these different
Mhm. Kinda helps
aspects.
you to pull away from faith commitments and to
That's
see the
right. That
literariness here.
to see how a text worked.
Mhm,
And,
mhm.
I was always an avid reader of
Mhm.
literature, fiction. I
Mhm.
still And so it appealed to me very much, the idea that these were narratives. These gospel stories are narratives. And so why should we not be able to apply the same kinds of analyses that we do on other narratives to these ones?
Yeah.
And that's not a point that needs to be argued anymore now. That's
Right.
generally
Accepted that.
accepted.
Right.
But in the late 70s, early 80s, when we
Yeah.
began to use this approach, it was very controversial. So I appreciated this book.
It's amazing, isn't it, how things can change,
Yeah.
to get to be a part of seeing that happen. You mentioned one more. Let's see, the
This is Lou
history.
Martin, History and Theology in the
Yeah,
Fourth Gospel.
it's
So
much.
this
Yeah.
is Lou Martin. Yes, that looks exactly like the copy that I have.
That
This
does it. Yeah, they had 2 versions on Amazon, and I went with the older one because I thought, "Oh, this is gonna look." Yeah.
well, actually, this was his dissertation,
Okay.
which came out in the late 60s, and nobody, as far as I know, paid a lot of attention to it. But then it came
Okay.
out in this edition in the late 70s,
Okay.
and then there was a third edition that came out in 2003. This is the book that sets out the expulsion hypothesis.
Oh!
Years arguing against
Okay.
this hypothesis.
Okay.
But at the time that I read it, it blew me away.
Ah.
Um, and it's so vivid and it's so imaginative and
Okay.
so enticing. I think this is one of the reasons that people still adhere to it. And Lou Martin himself was such a gracious person. He knew that I disagreed with him on everything. And we were quite often on panels, and people put us on panels together
Gotcha.
because they wanted to see the sparks fly.
Right.
And we each said our piece, but we always had a very collegial and
I was just gonna
congenial.
say, yeah, you can disagree and not be
Oh,
antagonistic with each other.
really, he was really a joy to spend time with. And so I have a strong affection for the book,
Hmm.
even though I
Mhm.
can't even count the number of articles that I've written where I've critiqued it. I'm writing one right now where I'm again critiquing
Right.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not because of him. It's because
Right.
it is hold and,
Yeah.
time that people got over it. But
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, if it has taken a hold, then it needs to be spoken,
yeah,
addressed,
I mean,
right?
it
Yeah.
needs to be, critiqued. But it
Yes.
did have a very big influence on me.
Hmm. Well, thank you. Thank you for that, for explaining why those were so important for you, and it does kind of show in what we've been talking about that those were the, I'm most intrigued by the Ruther one, to be honest, how that was kind of coincidental. I I was trying to just track with you this whole time. I wasn't paying attention to our comments. There a handful of comments have gone on, and so I'm looking briefly to see if there were any questions for you. And this would be the time if you all do have any questions specifically for Dr. Reinhartz. We have just a couple minutes left, I think. If I can see that you all are enjoying listening. There was one comment that I was kind of chuckling at. Let's see if I can find it to share. I can put it on the screen here. Oh dear, here it is. I'm still smiling. Here we go. I'm still smiling, thinking about a brilliant biblical scholar talking about Greek being scary and thinking Jesus might have been from the 1st century. I think maybe, something in
You
here.
shouldn't have shared that to change people's image of me.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh no! No, but I was cracking up about it. I was like, I love the fact that this is real, right? I mean, the things that we don't pay attention to that we don't need to, right? I think that's actually um so I'm gonna share this with you. That Carrie Ann is often in my chat, is often live here, and comment sections are full of negative takeaways on many videos of biblical scholarship. But this is important, and I think I can add from what I've seen of her, appreciated because of it's just direct, but respectful, I guess. I think I'm tracking with you, Carrie Ann. Is that right, Casey? Let's see if there are any other questions that I've missed. I'm going to circle back to some of these perhaps that are just more specific. I wonder. Okay, let's see. Are there any specific questions that you all have? Does less? I think this might be a question I didn't have. Do less than 40 years of scholarship being dedicated to the study of the narrative critically as a narrative? What does all the prior scholarship? What about all the prior scholarship that is trusted? Do less than 40 years of scholarship?
Not sure what that means,
Yeah,
actually.
let's see if we can work that one out. KAC. Oh, so that do should be so. So less than 40 years of scholarship being dedicated to the study of the
Yeah.
narrative critically as a narrative. So what was going on prior to this?
Well, I mean, all right. I have
That's a big question. So yeah.
two sort of comments on this.
Okay.
I believe that fundamental to any study of the Gospels, let's say, is a literary approach.
Okay.
If you look at church fathers, if you look at Rudolf Bultmann, if you look at any biblical interpreters, they are like literary scholars. They are reacting to the literary form of the text. What changed about 40 years ago was the explicit use of literary theory to understand the literary form of the text.
Okay.
But all the scholarship on what we were doing before, source criticism, redaction criticism, form criticism, trying to figure out how Matthew and Luke related to Mark, trying to figure out if John knew Matthew, Mark, or Luke, all of those things are based on kind of judgments about the literary text. It's just that what changed was the explicit use of literary theory. So the scholarship beforehand focused, like scholarship now, on the different manuscripts that we have for all of these New Testament texts, on the broader historical, social, political, religious contexts in which they were written, what we might or might not know about the historical Jesus, what we might or might not know about the sources that one gospel author might have used. That was the scholarship going on before, and some of that is still the scholarship going on now. Part of what is good about what's going on now is that we do use a lot of different methodologies, not just literary, but also social scientific and various rhetorical criticism, various types of methods, some of which originated in other fields, but we see that they are also helpful for understanding our ancient texts.
Thank you for that. There are two specific questions. One affirmation. I'll just put this up here for you to see. This was amazing. Okay. Well, someone was asking what your faith background was.
Oh.
I think probably came in late. That you were.
I'm Jewish.
Yeah. Right. So this is a biggie. So part of me is like, well, we don't necessarily get into this. But since I've placed it in here.
So many thoughts. And Kira, I'm so glad that you couldn't stand it, because I also couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
I've actually written about this. I wrote a book that came out in 2007 called Jesus of Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And, at that time, the Mel Gibson movie was the most recent movie that I was able to interact with, and I wrote about that. I think it's hugely problematic from all kinds of perspectives, including Christological. I mean, not just because it is also anti-Jewish. It identifies Judas, for example, with the devil.
Yeah.
But also Christologically, it just portrays Jesus as somebody who's beaten to a pulp.
Yeah. Right.
If you don't know anything about the Jesus story coming in there, you would have no idea why people cared about this person, would have followed this person. You'd have no idea. So I went to see this because I was known, like in the Canadian media community as somebody who writes about Bible and film, religion.
yeah.
So I was invited to view the film before it came out.
Oh,
with
wow.
producers from a particular TV show from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC.
Yeah.
And one of those producers is Jewish. She didn't know anything about the New Testament.
Okay.
And we had
right.
a conversation about it afterwards. And she said she didn't understand any of it. None of it made sense to her.
Yeah.
And I think that's a major failure of the film, aside from how gory it was and how
so disturbingly. Yeah.
in so many ways.
Yeah.
It didn't even, if you didn't already come with a certain perspective on Jesus.
Well, a great familiarity with that story, right? That particular version.
A predisposition to love Jesus movies.
Right.
Anyway,
yeah. Okay.
I'm with you on that, whoever asked that question.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to ask one quick question, and then I think I feel like I need to let you go because we've taken up time in your busy day. I am curious about if you've read Theodore Jennings' book, The Man Jesus Loved.
No.
Is that because you are not interested in it, or because you are not familiar with it? Okay. Yeah. When I saw that one of your books was on the beloved disciple, or the disciple whom Jesus loved, Theodore Jennings handles that through the lens of Greek relationships between men.
Okay.
And talks about the language of, for instance, when the beloved, I keep saying the beloved disciple because that's how I grew up hearing him, right? But the man Jesus loved, he's being pointed out as the man Jesus loved at the point in the narrative when Jesus is telling all of his disciples that he loves them and he's willing to lay down his life for him. And so that this man or this disciple stands out separately in a different way, has a special connection. He talks about the language of the laying down at the dinner. He's actually kind of in his lap, not just next to, anyway. I find that really fun to engage and talk about. And as a person who grew up in a Christian setting, it was very, very difficult for me to accept, to even be okay with, like that is a possible reading, I should say. And that the writer was trying to appeal to a particular audience with that, and showing Jesus in this kind of a relationship, to give him some street cred, right? So anyway, I wasn't sure if you were.
No, I mean, I'll answer this. I'll respond to this a bit from the perspective of the movies.
Oh, okay, great.
There is this idea that Jesus was celibate and asexual, really. And most of the movies portray him that way, which is why in most of the movies, he's not a very interesting character.
How did you make that particular connection?
I mean, Jesus is a character because in film, because he can't be portrayed as ever changing or developing.
Right, because he knows all if he's God.
Portrayed as having any intimate relationships with anybody, because that would offend a certain type of Christian audience, or it's thought. Producers believe that will offend a certain type of Christian audience. But if you think about it realistically, if Jesus was a Jewish man in the first century, the expectation is that he would have been married, or in a heterosexual relationship, and no attention is drawn to that one way or another. I'm not saying that he was. I'm just saying that the assumption of celibacy is one that we read into the text, because the text doesn't tell us anything at all about it. Right. And in the movies, I think here about Scorsese's movie, The Last Temptation of Christ, which created a huge uproar, because there's a dream sequence at the end in which Jesus is shown as getting married to Mary Magdalene, who is pregnant with his child, and dies. He marries or enters into a household with both Mary and Martha of Bethany, and has a bunch of kids. That was seen as hugely problematic and very controversial. But what people don't recognize is that the most intimate relationship in that movie is between Jesus and Judas. And so when I was working on the Jesus movies, I lined up all the clips having to do with Jesus and Judas. And they're very suggestive in all kinds of ways. I think, Scorsese, he's being playful and provocative. But I think there's room for all those interpretations. I think the author of the Gospel of John meant to suggest that Jesus and whoever the beloved disciple was were in a sexual relationship. I don't think he really meant to suggest that.
Okay.
But we also, I mean, one way or another. And in fact, you know, I did an article once on Mary Magdalene, on John 20, which is Mary Magdalene encountering the risen
Right.
Jesus and thinking that he's a gardener. And I showed there that the language that's used there in Greek is almost verbatim of some of the language used in the Song of Songs. And so an erotic next to it. There's not the only one that's noticed it. But what we know is that a first century author didn't have a problem creating these erotic,
in the garden,
subjects, both with respect to the beloved disciple and with respect to Mary Magdalene. So the idea that Jesus could be associated using this kind of language, the language of intimacy, wasn't a problem for that first century writer. That's the point.
Exactly.
So as far as Jesus' own nature, I don't know, and we don't have a soul to know. But at least know that the kind of Puritanism that we now know that Jesus has to be the sanitized figure.
I mean, I shock people when I just ask them to consider that he had to go to the bathroom, like take a pee and take it up. Like that shocks it up people.
Right. Although he's not always portrayed as eating, which is kind of interesting.
That's true.
Think about it. He's really not very often portrayed as eating. Now we have to assume that he ate, though, right?
We do.
If he was a historical figure, he would have eaten and done all those other things.
Did survive, yes. Yeah. Where is the article on Mary Magdalene and John 20?
I can send you the reference.
Okay.
The article is entitled "To Love the Lord." It's also something I did a long time ago.
Okay.
And maybe I can put in a plug here.
Yeah.
I'm currently preparing a volume of my own essays for publication. Okay. And that's the essays included. And I think the one that you mentioned from the violence book is also included.
Lovely.
And so, people won't have to, the point was to draw together things that I had written on. It's only on my stuff on the Gospel of John that had been published in various collections and things to make it easier for people to access.
Yeah. Who is publishing that? Is that
De Gruyter?
Oh, De Gruyter. Okay.
Yeah.
I am so grateful to you, Adele. Thank you for.
Well, thank you for asking.
Oh, good. Yay. Lots of comments in the chat about how much they appreciate and are just enjoying what you're talking about and appreciate you coming on and talking about it. And I feel like this was a lovely presentation of some ideas that I think are important. And it's really cool to get to hear it from the person themselves who's been writing some of this stuff. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Adele Reinhartz. And I am going to wrap up the live stream here, folks. Thank you so much for being here with me, being here with us. I will be back next week with another scholar, and I will be posting a thumbnail for that soon, just so you know who it is to look forward to. And then I will be back again doing more political and economic readings of some of the stories in the Gospels that Jesus is telling. So that'll be fun to get back to that in a couple weeks. Thanks for being here. Thanks, as always, for subscribing and liking various videos and sharing with your friends. I appreciate all of the ways that you support me and help me continue to do this work that I really, really enjoy. So I'll see you all next time.